Well, tonight the Trump administration is threatening more sanctions, speaking of sanctions, right? This time against Russia. Why this time? Why Russia again, I should say? Well, because Russia is not willing to cut off its long-standing foreign relations and economic ties with Venezuela, interestingly enough. So the pressure will continue, said Elliott Abrams. Elliott Abrams, we should point out, was prosecuted for lying to Congress about his role in the Iran-Contra scandal. What is also salient about Abrams in this particular point, who is now trying to overthrow the Venezuelan government, is that he was once in charge of overthrowing governments in El Salvador, in Nicaragua, and in Guatemala. That's important to this story. And in all three of those countries, by the way, tens of thousands of innocent civilians were killed in civil wars and atrocities that were arguably perpetrated by our CIA. Those are facts. As hurtful as it may sound, talking about our own country, those are facts. Now, I just think that we all should know that as we hear this report about now Russia getting involved, for better or for worse, in this Venezuela affair. Our correspondent for this story is Yulia Shapovalova.
Representatives of Venezuela's opposition leader Juan Guaido have been in contact with Moscow. That emerged from the Russian Foreign Minister Sergey Lavrov, who spoke to RT before his tour of South America.
We are in active talks with all representatives of the Venezuelan political landscape, the government, the opposition, including Mr. Guaido's people, who also contact us. We've explained to them our position on the unacceptable attempts to solve their internal problems by provoking outside interference, as we now see, with constant threats by the United States. All options are on the table, but you know, in general, in Venezuela, it seems to me that the situation is changing for the better.
Lavrov called the initiative first put forward by the EU an unsuccessful external attempt to provoke another colour revolution. According to Moscow's top diplomat, the EU's, quote, ultimatum to urgently hold presidential elections didn't comply with international law. Meanwhile, the position taken by the Montevideo mechanism, that includes countries like Bolivia, Mexico and Uruguay, and the Caribbean Community, or CARICOM, that advocated that the government and the opposition should enter into dialogue and agree among themselves without any preconditions, is much more feasible than the EU's ultimatum.
This is a much more promising position. It fits into the norms of international law, and the situation has now turned into what's called the Oslo process. This process is aimed at reaching an agreement, a compromise, between the government and the opposition, so common sense gradually begins to prevail. I hope that, given the positive comments of President Maduro and the opposition on how this negotiation process is going, an agreement that will suit everyone can be reached. This will primarily be in the interests of the Venezuelan people.
Political unrest has been ongoing in Venezuela since January. Mass protests against President Nicolás Maduro began in the country on January 21st, shortly after he was sworn in. The head of the opposition, Juan Guaido, declared himself the interim head of state, dismissing Maduro's 2018 re-election as fraudulent. In turn, Maduro called the head of parliament a U.S. puppet. Guaido's move was recognized by more than 50 countries, including the U.S., while Russia, China, Turkey and a number of other countries supported Maduro as the legitimate president, as did Venezuelan state institutions and the military. Mr. Lavrov also stressed that the vast majority of countries in the region do not want the conflict to be solved by force. Even those who demand the immediate resignation of President Maduro categorically do not accept the idea of an armed scenario. But there's still a lot to be done and political will needed to get any agreement over the line after the Venezuelan opposition said the Oslo talks in May bore no fruit. Yulia Shapovalova for the news with Rick Sanchez.
So you haven't heard that we're the ones covering the stories that you won't see covered anywhere else? In Venezuela, Kazakhstan, let's go to Hong Kong. And the media reaction to that has been crickets. How about the way we cover those stories? What the hell does that mean? Wally, Wally, Wally. That's the key word in this case, uprising. Can you believe that? Watching. This is the right thing for members of the media to do, to actually pick sides. Look, if you like what you see, subscribe.